Hi, my name is David Bose. I'm the Communications Director for Washington Policy Center, and welcome to this episode of Washington Policy on the Go, Olympia Watch. Today's special focus is on education and education policy. When are our schools going to reopen? Why have they remained closed so long? And what are the long-term implications for the students and the parents impacted by these closures? If at any point, as is the case with all of our events like this, if at any point you have a question, just use the question tool at the bottom of your screen via Zoom. There's a Q&A section there. Just enter your question into that Q&A box. And after Leave Finna, our Center for Education Director, and I have our conversation one-on-one, we'll start collecting those questions and asking as many of them as we can. We usually get to all of them, and if there's any left over, we like to answer those via email after the program. We'll have, I think, one more event a week after next scheduled for the Olympia Watch series. That'll close out this series, but we'll continue to have regular Washington Policy on the Go virtual events as well. We also have a Facebook Live Washington Policy on the Go next week, hosted by Chris Cargill, and I'd urge you to check that out on our events page as well. No registration required for that one. You just have to go to our Facebook page at noon on Tuesday, which is when our events are held, noon on Tuesday, for the Facebook Live event next week. Right now, I'd like to call up our Center for Education Director, Leave Finna. Leave, as always. Hey, great to talk to you today. Great to have you on. And really, you know, it's been a long time since we talked. I think the last time we were talking, you were making some predictions about what would happen in the current legislative session. And if memory serves, quite a few of your predictions have come true or close to it.
Yes, unfortunately, I did predict that the first move of the lawmakers in the legislature would be to protect the system from any damage in funding that could result from the fact that 40,000 plus families have pulled their children out of the public schools during COVID. This represents some $600 to $700 million in lost funding to districts, and lawmakers have moved to create what they have a term for it, which of course escapes me, sustainability funding, something like that, which is another term for funding empty seats, essentially, in the classrooms. And I see that they're going to do that in the budget. There was a bill proposed, and I suspect they're going to do this in the budget. Of course, the schools are like, they have never had so much money as they have now. As you know, Dave, there's been 3 different tranches of money given to the public schools through COVID, and now another 1.8, the third tranche just passed by Congress, I believe. It's going to be $1.8 billion to the public schools in Washington state. And OSPI, the administrative agency, is going to get 600 million or something of that funding. I don't know what they're going to do. It's so much money, they don't know what they're going to do with it.
Yeah, I've said this before, I know, and I can't help but say it again. It reminds me of Yes, Prime Minister in the hospital with no patients, where you know there's a call for greater funding for the hospital with no patients, and the rest of the people are wondering, how can you not have patients? So let's get to the fact that the schools have been closed for the most part for over a year now. They're, you know, we say that we're reopening, but it's still, you know, it's not like it was before. I mean, this is an abbreviated or a truncated reopening. Even to this day. So one, knowing that charter schools and private schools have been open much longer safely, why has it taken public schools so long to reopen? And knowing that in other states, as you've pointed out on your blog numerous times, other states have been reopened for quite some time. What's the holdup for Washington public schools, and what does it mean for our future?
Well, the recent data show that Washington state, 40% of Washington state's public school students are still receiving only remote instruction, which makes Washington 43rd in the nation in delivering in-person instruction to their students. And this has now been tied to the presence and the power of the teachers union. And Washington Policy Center has a very powerful teachers union, and that is the direct and the the people who are being directly harmed by the power of this union are now families and students that are not getting access to their teachers. And I read yesterday, Dave, that 70% of Washington's school teachers have been vaccinated already. So you would expect that the schools would be opening now. And you'll remember that the governor moved in to pass a new emergency order declaring a mental health emergency for the children of Washington state and requiring districts to open to in-person instruction in April. And it's a staggered the first date is in early April for the younger kids. And then by April 19th, the older kids are supposed to get 10 hours of in-person instruction a week, according to the governor's order. Now, we've had orders like this on paper. We've had statements from districts saying they're going to reopen. And then when the date arrives, the union doesn't show up for work. So,
well, and we're still this closure's gone on for so long. Teachers unions are also in other states. So why is it Washington so unique still? Why is it such an outlier when it comes to this kind of thing?
Well, it's the states that have the strongest unions. Like California is 50th in the nation and has a very powerful union. I don't know. I don't understand why the state of Washington does not put the priority of educating its children first when it says so in the Constitution. We give $17 billion a year to educate the children of Washington state. They have been protected, that every employee in the public education system in Washington has received their paychecks through this terrible ordeal. And now the research is showing children are really being hurt in math. The McKinsey organization came out with a study showing that children of low-income families are being hit really hard by not getting access to in-person instruction. The people with resources, they hire tutors, they send their kids over to private school, but things are getting really, really serious. It's been a whole year, and now parents are worrying about what's coming in the fall. Okay, well, if you imagine you had a 10th grade student who needs to get his 11th grade year under his belt so he can apply to college or go to vocational school after high school. And you're watching what's happening all this year. Promises are made by your district in Bellevue, for example, or Seattle. Oh, we're going to open soon. And then the day for opening arrives and they say, oh no, we're not going to open. This has happened over and over again in Bellevue, Seattle, Lake Washington. A lot of the districts in the Puget Sound have promised and then broken promises to open. So people are now getting very desperate. What's going to happen in the fall? And these districts are not promising to return to full in-person instruction. I'm afraid that this government system has created an exception to delivering education in a health crisis. Now we have a new reason that the union can make to demand a memorandum of understanding of how they're going to teach. We have so many bad things have happened to the kids in the public schools. It is a very serious matter, and I can't understand why people allow this in our state. It's a bipartisan issue, and it's a broken system because of the funding. Once again, we've created a system that provides an incentive for it to stay closed. I mean, if you get a paycheck every day, regardless of how hard you work, Dave, why would you come to work? I mean, this is the underlying problem here. And that's what needs to be corrected. And the only way to correct such a system is to give some of the funding to parents directly so they have some power and some say. Every parent that has lived through this ordeal says they have no power. No one is listening to parents. No one is hearing the cries of parents and the suffering their children are undergoing in this very failed remote learning model. They're just brushed off, shrugged. Oh, you've lost a year of schooling. Oh, you might not get schooling next year. So what? That's that is how parents are being, that's how parents feel. And something has to be done to give parents real power. And it's, of course, money is power. They need to be given. And here we have $1.8 billion coming from the federal government. That money should be going directly to families so they can hire tutors, so they can get the individual attention that the children will need to catch up from this pandemic learning loss. We're living through a slow moving crisis. People are talking now about an entire generation being left behind because of the COVID shutdown of the schools, that people with resources will be able to protect their children and keep them on track in their learning. People without resources are going to suffer disproportionately like they always do. And why our state legislature can't can't, even though they profess over and over again they're caring about equity and social justice, you don't see $1 leaving the public school system that is on behalf of families in the current situation in Olympia. And I think it's a disgrace. I mean, they have not delivered education. They need to think about how to help families in this very serious time of crisis for learning in Washington.
You bring us many interesting points. The most fundamental of which is the lack of incentive. I mean, if for every other kind of good service, when a customer has the power to go somewhere else, obviously it gives you an incentive to try to keep that customer happy, to attract that customer, provide the best service possible. And it's not an insult to the people who are within a system. If the system's broken like that, it's well-known human nature that it'll break down without those kinds of incentives. And that's a problem for people. But, even the governor himself, as far back as February, I think you noted in one of your blogs that the governor said, we can open these schools safely. We know how to do it. Other places are doing it. And then it took over a month for the governor to reopen the schools on a truncated basis. And, for a lot of parents who are trying to deal with childcare, which is, there's a severe shortage of childcare, again, in part because of government disincentives that were put in place supposedly to help childcare workers and other things. And then we have a shortage and they're wondering why. But, reopening the schools on a very limited basis makes it harder for parents to plan in many ways. Well, like, how much of this in-person instruction is really there. And then if you're doing it for 2 days a week and it's partial days, do you count that as a reopening? Is that enough in-person instruction under the current model to actually make a dent in the steady stream of falling behind that's kind of sweeping over this generation of kids?
Well, there's no urgency because there's no money involved if you don't open. If you don't lose your funding if you don't open on time. So there's no urgency. You're like, as you said, the governor ordered on March 15th that the school should open by April 19th. That's nearly 5 weeks after his order, when he declared it to be safe. So this is exactly what the system does. It's sort of a slouching towards, the lowest common denominator. Let's do the least amount possible because, of course, again, the incentives are aligned that way. They don't lose any money if they only provide 10 hours of in-person instruction a week, which is what the governor has now ordered. Instead of 35 hours, they're going to get 10 hours of in-person instruction. And now I'm seeing districts cancel Wednesdays, essentially. And it is slowly being, they redefined what an instructional hour is by State Board of Education rule. They redefined how many hours a day's instruction the schools will get under COVID. And I'm afraid some of those redefinitions, which reduce the requirements and reduce the instructional hours and days of instruction, will actually become permanent because the system itself is so set up that way. It's just as you say, that if you buy a car you don't like, you give it back. You get your money back if it's a lemon, right? If you buy a piece of clothing that is defective, you give it back and get your money back. This is the way we normally. That's what keeps vendors and sellers of products and services honest. That's what keeps them accountable. If you don't like your accountant, you find a better accountant. You take your money with you to another accountant, but you don't have that in public education.
Well, and if they won't give you your money back, you just tell all your friends, and they know that. Other people, and you put up a powerful Yelp review, and they're going to go somewhere else. But this reminds me of your work on, there's a number of schools. I want to say there's 50,000 kids or 40 some odd thousand kids in Washington schools in chronically failing schools, and it was the state that put the metrics together to measure whether the schools were failing or not. And then over time, they changed the metric because the schools kept failing anyway. So instead of calling them failing schools, they changed the name to struggling or need support schools or something, masking the fact that they're still failing. And so over the years, and I forget, but it's been at least 5 years since you and I first talked about that back when I was just doing radio, and I want to say it's closer to 10 years. That means there was kids in the second grade who went all the way through, that grade after grade after grade, all heading toward these schools of failure. And when you can push things off year after year after year, that's an entire class of kids that get denied that basic education, that end up in a cycle of, oftentimes of poverty that comes from being undereducated. Certainly, their opportunities are unnecessarily limited because they're in these failing schools, but it still takes us so long to cut through the bureaucracy to say our number one priority is the kids. It's not the system. But if there's one thing I think COVID's illustrated is for a great many people and for a big part of our bureaucracy, the priority is the system, not the kids that it serves, and certainly not the parents that it serves.
Well, this is what COVID has really illustrated and helped parents see. It's a complex system, but when you realize that it's really being driven by bureaucracies and unions and their rules and laws that have been passed, and protective devices to keep, for example, teacher credential. The requirement to become a teacher is not related. All the courses you take to earn your teacher credential to get the license to be a teacher in Washington State, that's not related to excellent teaching. It's really related to protecting only certain people to be allowed into the monopoly of teaching. So that's one. There's all kinds of rules like that. The system has built in to protect itself from correction. So, for example, young teachers will be fired first if they're in times of financial stress. So, because the hiring and firing of teachers is based on the seniority of the teachers, not on whether they're excellent in teaching. So, we have a system that's baked in all these protections so that it's protected by a COVID shutdown. COVID shutdown. The system gets its money regardless. The entire system, whether it's using the money or not for any purpose, like empty buses running around during COVID. So that is, the system protects itself. It puts in all these rules, and they are not designed to actually help the children learn better. And your example of, and so then policymakers get frustrated and they say, what can we do to make these schools better? And they create these quote unquote accountability systems. And what you were talking about is this testing system and a process by which schools are judged for their performance in teaching children to reach the minimum levels set by the state academic learning levels in reading and math. And the state then identifies those schools that are not doing their job at teaching kids to reach minimum levels, and then labels them quote unquote priority schools, and then proceeds. And these are 117 schools in the recent, I looked at this up recently, 117 schools, 44,000 children assigned to state identified failing schools, and they assign them year after year. And then lawmakers think that they'll come up with a new accountability system that is going to fix this. But when the accountability system they put in is ignored, then what good does it do? It really, all the smart people in the country are saying the best way to make the schools accountable is to give control over some of the funding to parents, because then the parents can vote with their feet and take their money and go elsewhere. And that is the movement we're seeing in other states across the country. There are more private, tax credit scholarship bills, education savings account bills that are giving money directly to families. That West Virginia just passed a law, and West Virginia is a very powerful union state, and they just passed a law, but to give parents the total amount that the state provides for their funding directly to the parents. And so that is going to wake up the system in a way that no top-down accountability system would. It's the bottom-up accountability from parents that will make the bureaucrats and the unions sit up and take notice and say, we're going to have to improve the schools so people decide of their own volition to stay in them and not leave them for some other choice. And that is the wave of the future. That is going to come to Washington State, whether people here, whether the people that are protecting the system like it or not, because people are hearing about Florida's incredible options that are given to families. People are hearing about what Arizona offers families, and other states across the country are giving money to parents directly so they can send their kids to private school. And that is, the research is showing that is improving the traditional schools that left behind, because they see they have to improve their services or they will lose their customers.
Well, I want to ask one more question about the school shutdown situation and the glacially slow reopening of Washington schools. And then I want to get to a couple of other related, at least education related topics that have come up in the current legislature. But I do want to remind everybody, if you have any questions for Lee at any point, a number of you now are taking advantage of the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. You can ask your question at any time. Anything that's coming to mind regarding education that you want to ask, just pop it into that Q&A box there. We'll be getting to your questions here in a few minutes, and we'll try to get to all of your questions. It's helpful if you put them in the Q&A box rather than the chat screen, because the Q&A box makes it easier for us to go through them and scroll, whereas the chat, they kind of get lost in an array of text. So use the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen there. And don't forget, next week we have the Facebook Live Legislative Lunchbox, Olympia, Washington Policy on the Go, Legislative Lunchbox edition, hosted by Chris Cargill. That'll be coming up Facebook Live noon next Tuesday, same time. Just go to the Washington Policy Center Facebook page and you'll be live and ready to go, or you can pre-register on our site, maybe get a little reminder. And then we'll have one more Washington Policy on the Go Olympia Watch edition coming up in 2 weeks here. And I'll be hosting that, and it'll be the same format as you're seeing today, depending on legislative happenings. Sometimes we bring more center directors on because something's breaking, something's happening. Very quickly though, Lee, on the school closure front, we've talked a lot about the process and the system and the disincentives. Now let's just get real quick to the students. You know, they've lost a year of learning, this generation of students. Some of them, you know, are graduating anyway, but from the looks of the class load, I mean, I remember my senior year was not what it should have been. And I look back and I think, you know, I should have gone to, if I'd have known of an early start kind of, you know, a jump into college, I should have done that. But you know, for a whole year's worth of Washington State school kids, there's kids graduating, and it seems like they really missed most of a year. And now kids are, you know, they're going on year 2 here, and missing a lot of instruction. And the instruction seems, you know, anecdotal evidence from parents that I talked to, they're not very impressed with the academic rigor of most of what they're seeing. And I'm wondering, what do you see as the long-term consequence to that in Washington schools? And also there's been a lot of talk about the emotional and mental health of the students that have missed so much time with other students. Is that something that easily heals over based on what you've read, or do you not know? And then is the reopening that we're experiencing, is that enough to kind of draw down that level of emotional disturbance that kids are experiencing, being, you know, so isolated?
Well, you asked a lot of questions, one at a time.
Yeah.
Let's start with the last one first. The research is showing, all the numbers are showing that the mental health of children has really suffered, and that's why the governor has issued this executive order to order the schools to open up, because of the mental health of students. That there is an increased incidence of suicides and and extreme mental anxiety and all kinds of bad things that happen when people are isolated from one another. People are social animals. They need to be with other people, and especially teenagers. And so they are especially hard hit. As for their academic learning, they're, you know, I would say every parent should be figuring out a way to assess what their child needs and is lost in this process, and find a way to bring their child up to grade level. And that is possible from all the that is possible to do for the average parent. You can just go online and find information to teach and get your child up to speed. I think this is a serious matter. We can't just shrug it off and say nothing has been lost here. Something has been lost here, and it's incumbent upon parents. Who else is going to care about your child like you do? The system, do not let the system tell you that they're going to catch you up, because they're not capable of providing instruction individualized to the needs of each child. So do not buy that. part of what's been learned here is that this is what I am hoping the silver lining out of this whole experience is that no longer can the schools claim the mantle of being for the children. That was the reformists like us were always going uphill because the attitude of the average person was, oh, we're happy with my traditional public school in the suburbs. I live in a nice neighborhood, and what are you complaining about? Everything is fine for me. And now that this public school system in Washington State has lost the respect of the parents. I mean, there is a huge frustration among parents against all the broken promises and all the things that have been said to them. And so that, I think, bodes well, because I'm hoping that that message gets through to our lawmakers and they start responding to the needs of parents and grandparents. So that's what I see as a positive outcome of this. But in the on the ground, everybody should be concerned about what their child has lost this year in school and figuring out a way to make it up to them, because and not relying on the public school system to do it, because they cannot do it. They are not capable of doing it. They can't even open their doors. So it's, you know, I would be calling upon my lawmakers to give me help, give me direct aid so I can educate my child to the level that the state says they're going to educate. So, you know, there are other things happening here at the legislature. The effort to give parents choice to go to public charter schools is in trouble now. There's a bill that was supposed to extend the authorization time for charter schools, which was killed in committee by the union leaders that hate charter schools, which means that we are only going to have 19 charter schools in Washington State, and those are getting, you know, $3,000 less per student. And so we're likely to see the attrition of our charter schools in Washington, because the union hates charter schools and the union does not like to give parents options. And so, you know, with that, the harm will fall hardest on the low-income minority children that were so grateful to have an option to their inner city urban school that was failing them, and their opportunity to go to public charter school. It is, to me, a real sad state that our legislature has not extended the time for authorizing new charter schools this year. And I'm trying to think of there were a couple of bills that were very promising one got a hearing. Senator Schessler's bill, 5200, to give families with special needs children a $15,000 scholarship, and children that are in foster care so they can go to private school. That bill got a hearing, but was killed in committee by the education chair of the Senate. And then there was another bill by Vicki Kraft, which didn't get a hearing. Representative Vicki Kraft introduced a $7,000 education scholarship bill, which would have given $7,000 to families to send their kids to private school. And that didn't even get a hearing. So that is the problem we have in Washington State, that the existing powers in the legislature do not want to give parents options. And if the COVID experience told parents one thing very loudly, and that they needed options to the current system of public education. So I'm hoping that gets, you know, widely understood. There are ways to give parents options. The legislature can give parents options if it wishes to. The system itself will fight tooth and nail to avoid giving parents options because it's a monopoly. But that's what we have to start talking about. Is this money for the system, to protect the system of public education, or is it to educate the children? And, you know, we're seeing other things happening in the public schools that are worrisome. I mean, you remember the whole sex education controversy last year, but this year there's a new controversy, and that's mandatory critical race training for the public school staff and higher education staff and medical school students. And this is a very worrisome development. So this is part and parcel of a government-run public school system. It can be taken over by radical special interests pushing an ideology that the average mainstream person doesn't like and finds to be racist and hostile to them. So we're seeing some very worrisome bills in the legislature this session, and it's all part of the fact that we have a monopoly system that is not responsive, not accountable, and it serves itself. And
Well, that actually brings me to my next question about critical race theory. You made mention of it there, but there's a number of bills seeking to mandate what they call training in that. First, give us a brief description of what critical race theory is, what, in a nutshell, what does it mean? And what kinds of training is the legislature seeking to mandate, and are the bills likely to pass this session?
okay, let's start with what it is. Critical race theory is uh, an intellectual construct that divides people based on race and sex and sexuality, and labels them as oppressors or victims. And this is being taught in some of the schools in Washington State already to our children. So if you are a white boy and you may be asked to say to your class that you're an oppressor and that you're sorry for being the oppressor, when this white boy has had nothing to do with oppressing anyone. And it's a very dangerous and divisive and hateful ideology. And now they have three bills: Senate Bill 5044, which would require staff in the public schools to be trained in this ideology and to apologize for their oppressive status before their peers, which violates, of course, the First Amendment prohibition against compelled speech. This violates the core civil rights protections that protect people from being called out for their color of their skin, for which they have no control over. This is going to be mandated in the public schools if 5044 passes, mandated in the higher institutions of higher learning if 5227 passes, and mandated for medical students if 5228 passes. And if someone were looking at a way to make everyone angry at one another and hate one another, this is the way to do it. And this is moving through the system. So
well, let's move to an example in Seattle math. You know, we received a document that was describing all the different ways that math is oppressive. You know, has Seattle implemented that already? And is that a part of critical race theory? And what does that mean for the future of, I mean, you know, just from a glance, it looks like this has everything to do with everything but math.
It's in the Seattle public schools. They're trying to integrate. They're saying that, you know, math it's such a weird misunderstanding and confluence. It's an ideology trying to make a point based on race. And so people are saying that math is math is a sexist tool used to dominate. It's this whole construct of the oppressors against the victims. Math is used to oppress the victims. And now it's being integrated in all the subjects in English language and in history. And I mean, the absurdity that math could be labeled as racist is obvious on its face, but it's spreading, and it's listed as a possible curriculum on the OSPI website. So they're talking about making this a requirement to be imposed on all the school districts in Washington State, not just in the radical one of Seattle. So it's, let me tell you about this one example of a lawsuit that's been brought by, there's a Black woman named Gabrielle Clark, who is a single mother of three boys. And her oldest boy, the father of the oldest boy was white. And so the son, a senior at a public school in Nevada, in Las Vegas, Nevada, passed as white, but his class was all Black. Okay, all the other kids but he passed as white. They did this. His 22-year-old teacher started teaching the social justice class, teaching the children that this boy, her son, is white and part of the oppressive class. And so he basically got a bullseye on his back. All the other Black children were told that he is part of the oppressive class, that oppresses them. And so she filed a lawsuit against the school in Nevada and got a victory in the preliminary motions of that case. And she's going to win, because this clearly violates his civil rights to put a target on his back because he's white. And this is what we're going to see a lot more of, is lawsuits like this. And how we could get this far, and how teachers could actually stand in front of a classroom and do this to children is incredible. How could teachers do this without understanding that they're hurting the children in front of them? So now we're going to have, if these bills pass, all the staff in our public education system in Washington state are going to be trained in this hateful, racist thinking. And I have read a great deal about it. I am in good standing. There are many Black, Hispanic, and Jewish intellectuals and leaders that are speaking out against this. There's a movement against it across the country. And so I'm hopeful that we will wake up and understand that when someone comes to you with a diversity, equity, and inclusion mandatory training program, you know, the red lights should be going off. This is not what it looks like. It's being sold as bringing us together, but it is a divisive, hateful ideology. And we need to have people speak up and say, no, we're not going to let our children be hurt by this. This is not acceptable. Like this woman, Gabrielle Clark, who is has no money, has no standing, has no husband, no job, and she's suing this school district. And my hat's off to people like that in our country that have the courage to stand up to protect their children from hateful thinking. I think that's awesome. So, I mean, that's the whole purpose of our democracy, isn't it? To discuss these things so that we can make it the best possible schools for our kids and not have ideologues, force thinking on us.
This is a good opportunity now to move to audience questions. If you have any questions, feel free at any time to put it in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. A nice little tool from Zoom where we'll tackle your questions coming up next. And if you're looking to register for our event next week, the Facebook Live event, and you want a reminder, you can see the link is right there in the chat function. You could also register for the Washington Policy on the Go event in 2 weeks, the last of the Olympia Watch series in 2 weeks. So you can just click that link, or you could share it with a friend who might be of interested. And as always, if you value the information that you get from Washington Policy Center, you value that free market perspective, and you want to see it spread, we'd urge you to join Washington Policy Center. There are ways to give, become a member, become active in Washington Policy Center. And we ask that you share our materials online. I mean, almost all of our materials end up on our social media channels. We could use your help to spread it that way as well. But there'll be a link with membership levels and how to give to Washington Policy Center here in a moment in the chat function. And I would urge you, don't be a bystander to what's happening for Washington State. Be a participant. Join Washington Policy Center and be a part of one of the most effective free market organizations in the country. All right, to your questions. First question up, can you comment on the Empower Washington efforts to promote school choice? Leave.
Well, thank you for that question, because I was just going to say, I was seeing that people are asking for initiatives that I'm aware of, and I'm aware of that initiative, and it's a good one. And EmpowerWashington.org is a group that is organizing to try to put an initiative on the ballot that would give money to families directly for the purpose of educating their children. So I think it's a promising initiative. They're just getting underway, and they're raising money, and they are very smart, capable people, and I am hopeful that they will be successful. That's one thing that is positive that I've seen come out of this. And this is, of course, an outgrowth of the parent frustration in this state under COVID. It's a logical reaction to having your schools taken away from your children. What are we going to do about this? And that's one thing that's happened. Then there's other groups on Facebook, like the Washington Alliance for Kids. They're very effective, very smart people. They've done a great job putting pressure on the governor. I think it's because of them that the governor even came out with their emergency order to reopen the schools 5 weeks from now. And so joining other like-minded parents, obviously in this time, is the most important thing. But of course, taking care of your children and making sure they get the education they need. There are online materials. Khan Academy, K-A-H-N, Khan Academy has fantastic free online training, courses in every subject through college, and you can just, they are awesome. So there are, and then there are other ways to educate your children. So that's what I suggest. Join other people.
Quick comment. If you're looking to ask a question, I keep saying it's at the bottom of your screen. And of course, as my friend Fawn Spady points out, the chat function, it depends on how you're viewing. So it could be on the side of your screen, right or left, depends on how you've set up your screen. But look, there's a little, two little iconic little chat little bubbles up there. And like, you're talking with people, that's the Q&A box. Just look for the Q and the A and that little icon, and you'll be able to ask your question, no problem. The next question, can we sneak in education savings accounts with all the extra cash available?
Well, wouldn't that be nice if the legislature was aligned with us? With all the extra cash available, you could give every family in Washington State $1,800 to catch, to pay on educating their kids, hire a tutor to catch them up over COVID from their COVID learning losses. Wouldn't that be nice? That's what we should be doing with all this money. That's 1.8 billion that we're getting right now. We've gotten another billion to the school. So 2.8 billion, that's about $2,800 per student that we could have been giving. If we'd taken the federal money and given it directly to families, we could have given families $2,800 per student. Now that would have been the rational thing to do. When you close the government schools due to COVID, then you should be helping the families that are no longer getting their kids educated. But no, what we have done instead is put all the money into the system that has not educated the children. So it's an incredible fact pattern for choice and expanding options for parents and giving power to the parents, because under the current system, the system takes all the money and all the power and doesn't listen to parents. It's dysfunctional. I mean, we've had a failure. It's a failure. So let's call it that. Let's fix it. Let's get together for the sake of the kids to improve our schools. And really the only way forward is education savings accounts, some kind of a voucher that, the system will scream and yell, you're privatizing public education. Well, what has privatized public education more than the COVID shutdown of the schools? 40,000 people have pulled their kids out to private schools, to online schools, because they were not being served by the public school system. So it's high time we do privatize the system, the delivery system of public education, not the funding. The funding should be publicly provided, but the delivery system for education should be privately delivered. And then we would be free of these indoctrinations of critical race theory, sex curricula that we don't like for our children. And we would be able to choose, and we would have a flourishing of opportunity and new ideas for educating children that isn't standardized and rote and government run. I mean, we could see a real flourishing of education if we were to free up the money and give it to parents.
Next question, will teachers be required to teach through the summer since they've not been teaching so much in person for the past year?
No, they won't be. No, they won't be. The teachers are not going to teach during the summer. One legislator tried to do that, but it was very piecemeal, on a pilot program for 20 districts, only on a voluntary basis. No, the teachers will. That's another logical solution, but under the system, it's not logical. It's self-serving.
Can we inform high school students better about their options under Running Start for juniors and seniors?
Can we inform them? Are you saying the districts are not informing them? Is that what they're saying?
I think the impression is that there's a lot of juniors and seniors unaware that they have Running Start options that might be better, particularly in the COVID era, than their current high school options.
Well, I'm happy to write a blog post to try to inform high school seniors, high school juniors, and actually 10th graders that they have this option, but that's really something the district should be telling them, that this is an option for them. And if they're not, of course, they're failing their duty to those children. It would be actually an improvement to the system if we did what Idaho does. Idaho actually gives $4,500 to each 8th grader to use on their high school education, which has had the direct effect of increasing the number of rigorous courses offered to high school students in Idaho. And so if we were to give the money that is spent on, Running Start to the child, they would all wake up, oh my goodness, we get some money to spend, and let me use it on a community college so I can get my, my degree earlier. That's the way to inform everyone, not to hide it in some notice that some bureaucracy is supposed to tell some district that resents the fact that the children are going to Running Start and taking public funding and going to a community college. So that's why you see the incentive is to not tell children about Running Start, and that's why they don't hear about it.
Can you talk briefly about how charter public schools have done during the pandemic and how the cap needs to be lifted?
Well, I asked the Charter School Association what happened exactly with the charter schools. And as of March 1st, 6 out of the 12 operating charter schools were fully open 5 days a week to in-person instruction. And the other charter schools had already been providing hybrid instruction. So they're way ahead of the traditional public schools in terms of serving the children with in-person instruction. And with regard to your other question, there's a bill. This is the last. No, we can no longer, under current law, authorize new charter schools. So there was a bill in the legislature to extend the time for authorizing to 2026, and that bill was killed by the union, by the chair of the House Education Committee, Sharon Tomiko Santos, who is a close union ally and who hates charter schools. And so unless something unexpected happens in the remaining 4 weeks of the legislative session, we're not going to have new charter schools.
Next question, which local or state elected or not elected positions are the most appropriate to confront the teachers union monopoly? And what are the policies that such positions should advocate to win the hearts and minds of families that are hurt most by the teachers union?
The question is, which legislative leaders should be talked to?
Which positions, what position, either elected or unelected, is best suited to challenge the WEA monopoly on Washington public schools?
Well, unfortunately, right now, we have a situation where the governor and the chairs of the House and Senate education committees were all elected with the strong support of the union. And so those are the most powerful people with respect to education and improving education for the future. So that's where if you were interested in writing something about improving what is done for families and education, those are the people to focus on. And the governor, to his credit, has responded because he has heard so much from families, how unhappy they are. And he himself has a grandchild in the public schools. So he feels the pain. He understands that the children are losing out. So that's where I would put my current energies into. The squeaky wheel gets the grease, and maybe there'll be more strength shown from the governor, because I expect, and it's going to be needed, because if the past is any guide, the union will the districts will say they're going to open, and then the day arrives for opening and the union doesn't show up for work. So you can't trust anything that is being said by these districts. So that's why keeping pressure on the governor is important, because he can ramp up the pressure on the union. He's got all kinds of tools available. He could withhold funding to these districts that are not opening.
So leave a follow-up question here, semi-related. If choice and vouchers came to Washington, financially, how disruptive would this be to a significant number of, if a significant number of parents utilize choice? Are there projections? And would there be limitations on how many kids could shift from public to private each year? Have private schools recognized the demand that they would experience?
Well, that's a great question. I asked you to look at the state of Florida that has opened many avenues for parents that need to send their children to private schools. And you can see there that in districts that have a certain sort of market share of children leaving the public schools, the remaining public schools have improved in quality. you're asking a question that is really for lawmakers. They can decide how best to structure a voucher program so that the money is kept pretty stable. I mean, the current bill that was killed in committee, Representative Vicky Kraft's bill, would have given $7,000 per to a family to send the child to private school. That is $5,000 less than what the state provides on average to districts across the state. So by leaving the public schools, that would be a savings to the state of $5,000 per student. So it's not really a threat to the existing system of public schools. And in fact, for any child that would use such a voucher, the remaining federal and local funding would stay. So it would mean more funding for the students that remain. So I think it can be. So what your question is, how disruptive would it be? Look at the state of Florida. That system of choice has improved the quality of the schools in the traditional system. The test scores have increased and improved over time as a result of choice there. So disruptive is the wrong word. It's a force for improvement to allow and expand choice. It's true also in Arizona. The numbers, they have very good choice options for families there, many charter schools, many voucher programs, and the traditional school system has responded and improved itself. So it's a question of putting our focus on the quality of education that the children receive, not protecting the system. Who cares about disrupting the system if you're improving the quality of education that the child gets? So that's all I think about that.
Next question. Have you heard from many teachers about their struggles to teach online lessons?
I have heard, yes, I'm sure. I've read some accounts that it's been difficult for some teachers, but then I've also heard that many teachers are just sending packets of packets in paper materials and they're not applying much energy to it. So it just depends. Of course, there's some individual teachers that are doing a great job as much as they can under the current structure, but some teachers are not doing a great job. And so why should the families be hostage to the whim of the teacher? Really, I was discouraged to see that after losing a whole year of education, that teachers are not going to lose their spring break. They're not coming back for spring break, not even 1 week early to make up for a learning loss from COVID. They are, very programmatic. They feel very entitled. They have their union contract. They're only going to work so many days and not a minute more unless they get more money. It is unfortunate reality that the unionized system of teaching has degraded the attitude towards teaching amongst many of the teachers. And so that's why the charter school model is so much more promising, because the teachers there are so dedicated. They work so hard. They put in all kinds of overtime without demanding extra pay. They are devoted to helping these children catch up and succeed in school. We need a different model for teaching. And the teachers will tell you that themselves, the real professionals. They say, we don't like the way the union is treating the children, and we don't like the way we're being treated. So the whole model it should never have been imported into education in the first place. And here we have again, the COVID shutdown of the schools is another example for why it was a misapplication to unionize teachers. Teachers are professionals. They are not, factory workers. They can negotiate favorable terms with their employer without the help of a union. They are valuable. Their knowledge is useful, and they do not need to, follow some union guy saying, no, we're going to only do this minimum amount for everyone because we can't have more than just the minimum.
Are you aware of any tax credit scholarship initiative?
In Washington State, I'm assuming? Yes.
I'm assuming.
Senate Bill 5200, which Senator Schessler introduced in the Senate Education Committee early in the session, would give a $15,000 scholarship to special needs children and to foster care children to attend a private school. And that was an excellent bill. And I testified in support of that bill in committee, and the chair of the Senate Education Committee, Lisa Wellman, who was elected with the support of the union, killed the bill, so it did not proceed. And I think that that there would be support for such a bill if the group, the whole Senate, the whole House looked at the bill, because it would help children who are really, the special needs community has really taken it, taken terrible toll. This COVID shutdown, I've heard terrible stories from my friends with children that have special needs who are never going to catch up. They've lost so much.
Here's more of a comment than a question, Liv. This is an individual's business partner who works has the ability for her daughter to attend school 25% of the time, but they're not sending their child to school because providing transportation and daycare for 25% of the time does not work for them. This is, and then it's basically, this is part of how those in charge of the system don't recognize the challenges of the lives of the people they're supposed to serve.
Well, this is what so when you have a bureaucracy that is not nimble, not responsive, and heavily influenced by a union, they will do what is convenient for them. And so they've decided 2 hours a day is convenient for them. Have they taken into account the very real limitation that parents that it's absurd to transport a child to school for 2 hours and then go and get them back and go back and get them? That it's an absurd situation. It doesn't help the family at all. It's disruptive. And you might as well stay at home and work at your desk and learn something there. Yeah, I mean, what can I say? I mean, we're seeing it played out across every district in Washington State, that they are not considering the learning needs of children.
You mentioned that school shutdowns have revealed to parents how much school systems work for themselves and not for parents. You also mentioned that regulations on schools that changed during the pandemic may last. Can you touch on what changes from the pandemic may become long-term?
Yes, I'm really concerned about it. They had emergency rules to describe what an instructional hour and an instructional day is, to include homework time as counting towards an instructional hour upon which teachers are paid. So if teachers normally work 6 to 7 hours a day before COVID, after COVID, they only have to work 2 hours a day. The other 4 hours, when the child is working on homework, that counts towards that teacher's pay. That's what they did. And they did, this was the State Board of Education, the Office of Superintendent of Public Instruction. They wrote this in as an emergency rule, and we'll see if it continues. They may, obviously they're not going to make 2 hours a day the standard going forward, but they may reduce what they provide from beforehand. The other thing they're doing is they're getting rid of the tests. They don't want to have an accountability measure on the schools, which of course families like to have, to know if their children are learning to state standards in math and reading. The Superintendent of Public Instruction is trying to eliminate the state the SBAC, which is the state test, and replace it with the NAEP, which is the National Assessment of Educational Progress, which does not serve the needs of families. It's fine for a bureaucracy to get overall idea of how students are performing, but it doesn't provide individual information on children to teachers or to families. And so that defeats the whole purpose of the state testing. So they don't like that. They've never liked that. Now they're going to try to get rid of it. And then I've heard that Superintendent of Public Instruction wants to get rid of grades. Remember what they did last spring? They got rid of grades. It was going to be either an A or an incomplete. No one can fail. So this is another bad idea. And you see, I worry that and a friend yesterday said to me, this is very scary. They may be in the process, this government system that serves itself may be in the process of creating an exemption for delivering education if there's a health crisis. So who defines the health crisis? Is it COVID? Is it a bad flu season? Is it some other thing that the union then decides, well, we decided that this is too dangerous. It's not safe for the teachers to teach. We're not going to do it. I mean, we have no we have no way to fix this. They are in total charge.
We only have about 2 minutes left. I'm going to ask you two more questions. We'll have to make them very short answers to fit them in. But I want to thank everybody in advance for participating today, for being active. We have probably more questions during this Washington Policy on the Go Olympia Watch edition than we've had at any previous episode. We're going to upload this to YouTube, so I'd encourage you to share it with interested friends or family if they're interested in this subject, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. And again, consider being a part of Washington Policy Center. Join Washington Policy Center. Don't be a spectator in the state. Get involved and be a part of one of the nation's preeminent free market think tanks, having an impact on your state and Washington State. The link is right there on your chat, on the chat screen. And I'd encourage you to be a part of Washington Policy Center. And then, of course, if you want to register for next week's event, the Facebook Live event, or in 2 weeks, our Washington Policy on the Go Zoom event, the link is also in the chat function on your screen. Very quickly, Liv, can you comment again on the Idaho grants to families for education purposes, either enriched college prep or crafts?
There is if you look, you can Google this, but Idaho has a program for 8th graders. They gave them $4,200 to use for any purpose on their high school graduation, which makes 8th graders then think about, well, maybe I should take an AP course when I'm 11th or 12th grade. That costs a little money. And it provides an opportunity for families to sit and talk about what's coming ahead for education. They control the money. It has increased the rigor of the programs that they're offered by their high schools. That's one.
Last question, and I know that I think we've gone through more than a dozen questions, but we've had several more questions come in as the conversation's proceeded. Liv will get these questions. I'm sure she'll try and answer each of them to you via email as much as she can. So don't be frustrated if you don't hear your question as the last one. How many public school teachers do not agree with the WEA approach? What do you recommend they do to help?
Well, they can opt out of the union and join another organization. There are other organizations that are not like the WEA that provide insurance and some support that are available. And that would be the thing to do, is to pull out of this union that is so anti-education. Or just you could pull out and join this other organization, or just pull out and negotiate your own contracts, get your own benefits. It's very possible to do. I encourage you to do that.
Well, thanks, Liv. We've got a whole host of questions for you to be answering in the week ahead. And I'm sure Liv will take advantage of those questions and post them online, because I know if one person has a question, several people do as well. So I'm sure there's a lot of additional education material to check out at washingtonpolicy.org. Liv Finna, our Center for Education Director, thanks so much for making the time today, as always.
Thank you very much, everybody, for coming and listening. We really appreciate all of you. Thank you.
Absolutely. And I want to thank all of you who attended today. It's been a great response, and we really appreciate that. And again, if you know somebody who's been interested in this topic, we'll have this up on YouTube on our Washington Policy Center YouTube channel here soon. Thanks again for attending. We hope we see you next week and the week after for Washington Policy on the Go's Legislative Lunchbox and Olympia Watch events every Tuesday for the next 2 weeks. Thanks.
Bye.